minutes. Any additions to the minutes? None? Okay. Any questions on consent items? No, seeing none, we'll go into general business. So first up is First Creek Metro District.
Good afternoon, Chesarina Dancy, Office of Development Assistance. So there are two Metro District items today that we are asking to have moved forward to study session. The first is the First Creek Powhatan Metropolitan District. It is very large, 981 acres and approximately 9,533 residents. There is a preliminary plan showing a mix of residential and commercial and potentially some light industrial uses in the future. It is in compliance with our model service plan, and I'm glad to answer any questions, and we have counsel on as well for the districts.
Okay, any questions?
No.
Okay, any objection to moving it forward? Okay, that one's good. I'm gonna go to 4B.
Thank you. Yeah, this is for the Murphy Creek Industrial Metropolitan District, 70 acres, all industrial, no residential planned. And it is also in compliance with our model service plan.
Great. Any questions on 4B?
No.
Any objections to moving it forward?
No.
Okay, we're all set. That was painless. Up next for C, this is looks like Scott, you're up. Talk about IT lease authority.
Yes, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you to Scott Newman, the Chief Information Officer here at the city. Just some history on this item. In 2021, we worked with finance to establish the authority for IT to enter long-term leases, which in our world, long-term leases is typically 5 years or less. At the time, it was moved forward in 2021 as a resolution, but in 2022, outside bond counsel strongly suggested that it actually be entered as a authorizing ordinance to ensure that it satisfied the requirements of the IRS for tax reporting purposes. So in May of last year, it was adopted in formal council meeting, and this is just the annual recurrence to bring that item forward to authorize this again for the next year. Any questions?
Yeah, any questions for Scott? Okay, do we need to move this one forward, Scott?
Apologies, yes, sir. If we can move it to study session, that would be great.
Great. Any objection to moving it forward? All right, we'll move it forward. Looks like you're up again for 4D, Scott. An update on IT.
Yes, and I'm trying to see where Tim is. He said he's been trying to get into the call, but Tammy, are you able to see if he's just a participant instead of a
I had
presenter?
just sent him the link.
Okay.
Because it showed that he was trying to get in, so he should be here soon.
So while we're waiting for Tim, Councilmember Zvonek, we are not actually, in this particular quarter, we're not going to address specific IT issues. What we did want to do is do a recap of our cybersecurity posture for council and just give you an update on that. So unfortunately, though, Tim does have the presentation, and I know he is prepared to speak to it. So we can give him just another moment to see if he can get on, please.
Okay, we can do that.
And while we're waiting for Tim, I know Teresa's on, and she had sent a memo to through Jason Batchelor to City Council about our recent upgrade from Fitch. And I just wanted to remind the committee that it's a lot of work and effort by council as well as staff throughout the organization that make those upgrades possible, eventually lowering cost for issuance, and just overall a great report for the city of Aurora. So I wanted to bring that up and just acknowledge staff for all their work.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's obviously helpful. Lowers their cost of borrowing. But one other question, I guess, and Terry, we can talk about offline while we're waiting for Scott and team, is the old hire pension. I know that we had talked about that earlier in the year, and it seems to have I haven't had an update on that. So at some point I want to bring that back up and find out where things are.
I think in general, both old hire plans are not excited about changing the plan structures. And so without their support, it makes it very challenging to move those items forward. We did have a special meeting of the old hire fire plan recently and just met in person. And while they know change is coming because, there is an end to the member representation at some point, they're just not ready to have those discussions and dialogues. So I think for the most part, things are working well for old hire fire, and we haven't had much interaction with old hire police since the last meeting. So hopefully we can continue to move forward together, and city staff will continue to support both plans.
Okay, great. Any luck, Scott?
Not yet, sir. I know he's online. I think that he might be maybe in a waiting room. Tammy, are you able to see if he's still in the waiting room?
I don't see him. Let me try sending him a link. Hold on.
Okay. And I did send him the link as well. But unfortunately, I think he's got the presentation up already, so he might not be seeing our messages. If you give me a second, Councilmember, let me just try calling him on the phone real quick, if that's okay.
Sure.
Looks like he's on now. Maybe give him a second to load.
Yes, thank you for that, Councilmember. We did just get him on, so with that, Tim, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and share the presentation, we can go ahead and get started.
Yes. Well, again, apologies. I'm not exactly sure what was going on there, but here we are. So this is a follow-up to the resolution that City Council executed a number of weeks ago around banning Chinese, specifically 2 Chinese companies and a handful of Chinese applications. And at that time, there was some more prescriptive requests from City Council as to, formulating a program, getting that on board. So what Scott and I wanted to do today is just give you a quick brief on where those efforts have been, where they were. A lot of those efforts have been leading up to the resolution, as well as what is the roadmap for future. Just so everybody has an understanding of where that's going, and how we're focusing the concerns that City Council allied to us. So with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right. So it's going to be as fast as we can get through it here, but I wanted to start out by basically telling you what is the Information Security Office in regard to this this risk, this business process, and the request. Basically talk about what the portfolio of risk is, what the resolution had asked us for, what we're currently doing to date, and what our roadmap is for the future. So with that, the Information Security Office has a fairly newly formed division as of the beginning of this year. It's so newly formed that we are still having continued discussions with various stakeholders, including risk management, because obviously we don't want to have any confusion about what we do versus what the Risk Management Office does. That said, really the risk management, so risk and compliance is the name of the division. Under that division comes third-party risk management, basically supply chain risk, regulatory compliance, and a few other things. So I speak to those two because they pair so closely in this process. So, generally how we look at risk, how I look at risk is that it is a system we're creating that identifies these gaps to the overall organization's risk posture and appetite. What do we want to do? Where do we want to go? So council has helped to put wind in the sails of that. So I appreciate that. A few of the risk drivers we deal with right now, just so everybody's aware, not everybody sees behind the curtain sometimes, but I won't read them all, but some of our biggest current drivers are actually federal, state law, and industry regulation. And that should actually read visibility. But to make sure that we're properly in compliance with them, that we're properly enforcing those things, which are huge risk drivers for us, we do have to make sure we have full visibility. We have centralization of action so that it's consistent, right? Because there are constantly evolving attack vectors. We have a highly diverse portfolio of services here. It's not like the city is a company that just makes one widget, right? So as a result of that, any work we do in this space is going to help create better continuity of operations, normalize practices, will reduce duplicative spending, create a better visibility into the program, the metrics of success, as well as our supply chain, and in the process, reducing that risk and liability. And it's important to note there is a distinct difference when we talk about that. Risk is simply that. It's a determination that there is something going on with a third party that is of concern to us, right? Risk is the simple word that entails all of those aspects where we look at it, we evaluate if it's too concerning for us, and if so, what we're going to do about it. If not, how are we going to monitor it? Whereas liability is the realization of that risk, right? So if we have a risk of a vendor not doing, not meeting proper legislation or regulatory compliance, the liability there could be downstream to us, anything from losing our ability to comply with those regulations, in some cases losing our ability to generate revenue, or respond to life safety issues. So that's kind of the difference. And of course, this is interactive. I know there's a lot of things here, so please stop me if there's ever any questions you have or clarifications you need. As far as the resolution goes, I know you've probably seen a few since then. So at a high level, the objective of that resolution was to really ban and prevent the download of these specific applications. And again, those two companies that really had a very known relationship with the People's Republic of China. We know that they employed Communist Party members. Having said that, it is China. I mean, that's kind of like saying, in America, they employ Republican Party members or Democrat Party members, right? It's kind of the party there. So we have to be very nuanced about that. But some of the other risk drivers were the known history of mass data collection, the need to protect our assets from these types of vulnerabilities, and ensuring that we are aware and are managing appropriately any technologies that have the ability to harvest significant amounts of data that could be exploitable to us, and that we manage that risk, right? So as part of the resolution, then council wanted us to move to ban those companies and those products from city-issued devices and use. They did provide an exception on business need with approval over the ISO and city manager. Exceptions would be based on minimum necessary, and that there was a need to develop a third-party risk management program, active monitoring, and to not impact existing resolutions. For the essence of time, this is the existing resolution that we were talking about that was not to be impacted. That one is actually our 2022-81, and that was essentially City Council formally stating that the ISO would have unilateral ability to manage and oversee security and privacy citywide. So what's our current posture? And we did talk with a few council members prior to this, and provided some information, but I want to round it out a little bit more. We have currently been developing, and we've currently had a third-party risk management program for a number of years now. We are actively formalizing that, structuring it much better as of the beginning of this year, including the hiring of FTEs and migration to a platform that can really address our current and future needs better. Again, this is a laundry list, but it's provided to show you that the supply chain scope for an organization such as ours is excessive. Again, some of the other organizations I've worked with, a development company, for instance, they are going to have a lot of partners because they utilize other companies' code within theirs, right? But that's a single type of risk that we look for. Whereas here, we have 1,600 plus third parties across 22 business units, and actually what I consider 34 distinct business lines, right, which are different than departments, right? When we talk about the 22, the 34 goes down to really very specific, even boots on ground business processes. So as you can see, we have to deal with 37 frameworks. What's a framework? A framework is basically the regulator or the law or the industry comes out with a set of practices that says, if you're going to do business, you're going to use this type of data or systems, these are the things that you should adhere to. 39 regulations we currently are complying with. Regulations and laws are just that. They're more of the high level statement of anybody who's doing this thing or working with this data must comply with our frameworks. So there is a lot going on here, and there is a lot of risk in making sure that we get it right. Briefly, as far as liability and risk and what we're looking at right now, in the recent years, we have rolled out a new contract generation system. Since that time, we now have 153 contracts being monitored in there. We have identified over the last number of years over 1,900 risks across what we call 12 risk families. A risk family being basically just a consortium of identified risks around a specific factor of the business, right? As far as risk families go, what you're seeing here in these next few lines is these are actually now to get more into the works of what council was concerned about. The breakdown of these risks, as you can see, 962 are high and 568 are very high, right? These are identified against companies and can be multiple risks per one company. However, to split that out, we now have identified 264 what we consider high or very high risk third parties that are doing business in foreign countries. So that's why when we had the discussions that evening, the resolution was a great start, but there's still more work to do. So specifically to the resolution now and that risk in particular, this is the criteria we typically use during due diligence when onboarding a vendor or any third party to really help define this specific risk, right? The risk weighting for this, how we calculate it, is generally a low to very high. Please excuse my acronyms here, but hopefully most people know them. But what we consider low is what I call NAFTA, right? So that's exactly after the federal trade agreement. So that's essentially the US, its territories, Mexico and Canada, right? Oftentimes because of the associations and again, the criteria are above here. When we start to look at those will play out with location of service being the primary thing that flags it. Then we start looking down that path at the guidance and restrictions around those locations, as well as any history of violations of the company or of those states or nations, and any known or suspected ties. So very much along the lines of what Council was asking us in the resolution, much of which we were already working forward to. So moderate would be any of those NAFTA countries plus regional risk, right? So an example there is Mexico is obviously considered a NAFTA country. However, Jalisco is rife with criminal activity right now, which is too bad because there's a lot of beauty in Jalisco. But we have also had over the years vendors who have operated in certain states within Mexico that had higher cartel activity that's centered around fraud, kidnapping, and extortion, right? Those are not exactly the things you want to have your company sitting there in the midst of when they're processing sensitive information, because that's a great way to start the extortion cycle. So that's what we look at there. And then high, that's where we start to extend to other shores, so to speak. So EU and UN countries, right? So the thought process there is because of the relationships, because of the treaties, because of the structure we have around those relationships, there's a lot more ability to maneuver within them to address risk. However, they still are countries with their own requirements, their own extradition, their own judicial branches, and so forth. So that does create higher oversight when we have to start to include those as part of the risk profile. And then finally, very high, which is, it falls to commerce restricted countries, right? Terrorist nations, and then US countries with a regional risk. That is really the very high categories are really predominantly driven by the information and intel we get from our federal partners, such as Department of Commerce, FTC, SEC, all of those. Any questions yet? No? Okay.
I get no question. I mean, specifically, more, I guess, more broadly, you
Yes,
had, at one point said that the resolution was a good start. Is there additional action that you need council to take, or are these things that you all have the authorization or the ability to address these, other security threats without any action from council?
Wonderful question. Yes, thank you. At this time, I do not believe council needs to intervene further. I think the resolution you gave us was a very good line in the sand, and the additional provisions that you added to help make it more flexible across the whole portfolio, I think was really what we needed to continue to move forward.
Okay.
So yes, I do appreciate that. But I do feel very strongly that, as our council, if you understand what we're doing, then as you start to see the other problems, hopefully that can inform you if you want to drive any further resolutions. Of course, we're always happy to talk. So yeah, to that point and to your question, this is our current state, right? Third-party engagement, governance around the overall third-party risk management program, and security operations. So those harmonize, right? There's a lot of things we can do to secure against bad third parties and vendors, even through our security operation tool set, things that restrict them from connecting into our data sets, things like that, until they're approved. And so a number of those things have been in testing and are really awaiting these conversations, to be honest. We have a number of policies, a number of actions I'll quickly speak to here in a minute that I really wanted to just hold off to make sure that, walking through this strategy, nobody had any further concerns. So again, at a high level here, we are growing. We have done a lot to date with restructuring our MSAs to ensure that we're addressing any potential liability and risk in those specific contracts. We do have more to do. Talk about that in a minute, but we are moving to stronger platforms that are better aligned with us. We do continue to do ongoing monitoring. However, in full transparency, that is not as consistent and automated as I would prefer, which is why we're looking at new partners and platforms right now to roll out in Q3. Governance-wise, we have done a number of business or BPMs alignment to ensure that we're covering the spread here. We have gone out with more risk-based assessments. We are moving our strategy that way. For the 7 years I've been here, we've kind of had the tail wagging the dog, if you will. So we've had to do a lot of our efforts and focus a lot of our strategy based on compliance based drivers. That just doesn't work as well when we're talking about wanting to make sure we have good efficacy and that we're being very vigilant and respectful of funding and so forth. So we really need to move, and we have begun to move to risk-based. We've hired some folks, and we're continuing to grow out that position, right? And finally, so, council members, Zvonek, your question, this is our roadmap. And when I talk about our roadmap right now, because this program, I won't say is in its infancy, but is definitely going through a major maturation effort this year, that these are the things you can expect over the next 6 to 12 months, right? We are currently working with stakeholders to implement the same types of requirements that we have in the MSA that have been very successful into other contracting vehicles that we use to ensure that there's consistency with any vendor that we onboard, and that we're capturing that risk throughout all relationships where there could be a technology and information aspect to that. As I spoke to earlier, we are migrating to a new platform that will give us greater extensibility, greater integration, greater reporting. We will also be implementing what I call an enhanced intelligence vendor. These are vendors that you may have heard of in the past. People like Security Scorecard, Black Kite are two of the biggest leaders in this industry. And what they do is they provide us more real-time monitoring. They'll monitor the dark web, deep web. They'll see if, say, Acme Amble is one of our vendors. Suddenly, if Acme Amble, somebody's selling 100,000 of their emails on the dark web, we're going to know about that. And we're going to reach out to Acme and say, hey, have you been compromised? And we haven't heard about it, right? So we're getting a lot more visibility. And I do appreciate anybody who has worked to help provide that funding, because it is critical. A program such as this cannot be successful without continuous monitoring. It just isn't possible doing it on a yearly basis, because risk and liability changes very quickly, especially in technology. We are updating our lifecycle management process with the ultimate goal to reduce time to market for contract execution and due diligence. We do know that is and can be sometimes a bottleneck to business process and to innovation. And this year we're going to address that. Was there a question?
No.
Again, governance, we have hired some new folks. We're actually building out what the engagement division of the ISO. What this will do is these will be folks who are embedded with various high-risk departments that are either highly regulated or dealing with extremely sensitive information. Our first foray into this is with our PSAP, or our Public Safety Access Point, so the 911 dispatch center. These folks will be embedded to better understand the risk of the business, and then be able to work with our risk and compliance division to ensure that all the vendors are meeting those needs. We are expanding employee awareness and support. Obviously, we have a lot of great things to tell, but if we're not telling people, it doesn't really help, right? Information not shared is not information at all. We are working with city leadership right now and stakeholders in discussion around, is there a need for a third-party risk management BPM, or are the current BPMs successful enough to cover that, right? And I will be moving to more consistent reporting. And we have begun a formal risk assignment and assessment process in which, you know, for years, I think it's just been kind of an unstated thing where, hey, if legal's reviewed this thing and the ISO's reviewed it and risk management's reviewed it and purchasing's reviewed it, then they've all accepted the risk for us. And that's just simply not true. And that never was true. We each have our disciplines of focus, right? By way of example, the city attorney's office is looking for the legality of the contract. Is it legally defensive? Is it sound, right? Purchasing is making sure it doesn't violate ordinances and that it goes through the correct processes. Risk management is making sure that they have the right amount of insurance based upon what they're doing, and that it's valid. And then the ISO, we're looking at the overall risk posture of the vendor or the third party, right? Are you doing things right? Do you have good security hygiene? Have you had breaches in the past? So on and so forth. But what we aren't looking at is, are these products useful and effective for the business? That's the business's call. And more to this point of discussion, and one of the things we're considering as part of the BPM is an official stance on what is and isn't allowed as far as vendor risk, right? Can we contract vendors in certain countries? Can we not? What do those look like? Because right now there is an opportunity there. And so what happens is, you know, a business will identify a vendor. They fall in love. They love this vendor. It's going to check all the boxes. And I think that's wonderful. But then we find out during due diligence that maybe that vendor is developing things in India, or, you know, in some cases we found Russian-made things. So unless there is an actual BPM that gives me the authority to say, nope, we just aren't going to buy anything made in Russia, at that point it becomes a business risk discussion. And so that's something we've begun starting to manage expectations around with the business, and formulating that process to say, okay, the department director has to accept this risk, right? Because up until now, it's kind of whoever's been working with that vendor, right? The department directors are they're very good about, you know, empowering their people to do what they need. But unfortunately, sometimes people want to move so fast that maybe they accept something they shouldn't. So we're definitely rolling those things back up to the department directors so that they understand the risk within their department that's being accepted, and that they're the ones who have to accept it in those areas that aren't covered by us. And then finally, right now, our security operations and the maturity around restricting and monitoring these third parties to make sure somebody's not getting through the gateways is pretty stout. So we're just maintaining that at this point. But we will start doing more integrations to get more data telemetry points so that we can have a better overall picture of our third-party risk. And then we are going to start working on better notifications when risk happens, because now we'll be able to see things near real time, right? So it's not a week later we find out about it, and then we're telling the business after they've already heard about it on the news. So I ran through this extremely quickly. Are there any further questions, concerns? Is there anything that you would, as a committee, would like me to take back and ensure that we get into the program?
Any questions for Tim? I don't think so, Tim. I think this was very helpful. I appreciate the update, both on the resolution and just the progress made. Sounds like you guys this is very thorough and obviously an important topic. So just keep us apprised in terms of, anything that you need additionally from council in terms of action taken. But otherwise, appreciate the update and thanks for all you're doing.
Yes, thank you very much for all your support. You all have a wonderful day.
Okay, so that's the conclusion of the general business. Any miscellaneous matters for consideration? Okay, with that, we'll see you all next month and meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.